I spent 30 years building a safety net for my daughter, only to realize I had woven my own trap. My name is Odessa. I am 68 years old, a widow for the past 5 years, and I live a quiet life in a modest suburb outside of Atlanta. My late husband and I worked our entire lives in wholesale distribution. We weren't wealthy enough to be famous, but we were comfortable enough to ensure our only child, Sarah, never had to worry about student loans, car payments, or down payments. When Sarah married David 3 years ago, I wanted them to start their lives on solid ground. David worked freelance in digital marketing, which meant his income was as unpredictable as the weather. Sarah was an administrative assistant. They wanted a beautiful townhouse in a gated community in Buckhead, something far beyond their approval odds. So I stepped in. I co-signed the lease as the primary guarantor and paid the hefty security deposit. My credit and my bank account were the invisible pillars holding their lifestyle together. Every year, the property management required a renewed proof of income and a guarantor's signature to keep their favorable lease rate. The deadline was approaching on a Friday. On Tuesday morning, I received an email from the management office, needing one quick signature to lock in their renewal. It was a 30-second task. I called Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message asking her to call me back so we could sort the paperwork. Wednesday came and my phone remained silent. I called David. His phone rang 4 times before the automated voice kicked in. By Thursday afternoon, a familiar, uncomfortable knot formed in my stomach. I wasn't a hovering mother, but 3 days of absolute silence was out of character. They usually texted at least to ask for a recipe or a small favor. I sat at my kitchen table watching the clock tick past 4 in the afternoon. The renewal was due the next day. If I didn't sign, their rent would jump to a month-to-month premium they absolutely could not afford. I dialed Sarah one more time. Nothing. I didn't panic, but I decided it was time to take a short drive. The drive to Buckhead took 45 minutes with the late afternoon traffic. The sky was a crisp, clear blue, completely at odds with the growing tension in my chest. I pulled into the visitor parking of their gated community, nodded to the guard who recognized my car, and walked up the manicured pathway to their unit. As I approached the front door, I expected quiet. I expected to find a dark house maybe they had taken an impromptu trip and forgot to tell me. Instead, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thumping of bass. I stopped on the welcome mat. Laughter drifted through the half-open window. The smell of catered barbecue hung in the air. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The music lowered slightly and footsteps approached. The door swung open, revealing David. He held a craft beer in one hand, wearing a crisp linen shirt I had bought him for his birthday. His smile vanished the second he processed my face. Odessa. He breathed, shifting his weight to block the entryway. What are you doing here? I looked past his shoulder. The living room was full of people. I recognized David's parents sitting on the expensive leather sofa I had helped finance. There were balloons, empty wine glasses, and a large banner draped across the mantel that read, "Happy Anniversary." It was their 3rd wedding anniversary. I had completely forgotten the date, but apparently they hadn't forgotten to throw a lavish party. "I've been calling for 3 days." I kept my voice, even refusing to let my sudden embarrassment show. "The lease renewal is due tomorrow, David." Before he could answer, Sarah appeared beside him. She looked stunning in a new silk dress, but her expression soured instantly. "Mom, seriously." She crossed her arms, her eyes darting nervously toward her in-laws in the living room. "You couldn't just leave a message." "I left 3," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I was worried. You didn't answer." Sarah sighed heavily, rolling her eyes. "We didn't answer because we were busy setting all this up. We knew if we picked up, you'd want to come over and micromanage everything." I stood on the porch, the evening breeze, suddenly feeling very cold. Micromanage. The word hung in the air between us. I had never chosen their furniture, never told them how to decorate, never even visited unannounced until today. My only involvement in this house was the signature that allowed them to live in it. I came because the property manager needs my signature by tomorrow morning. I explained, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Otherwise, your rent increases by 40%. David scoffed, taking a sip of his beer. We'll handle it online tomorrow. You didn't need to show up and ruin the vibe, Odessa. My parents are here. Your parents are here, I repeated. I looked at Sarah. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. Look, Mom. Sarah stepped forward, lowering her voice into a harsh whisper. Stop calling us. We have our own lives. You don't need to check up on us every time a piece of mail arrives. It's suffocating. Just let us handle our own business for once. I studied her face. The daughter I had raised to be kind, to be thoughtful, was standing in a house I secured, surrounded by things I subsidized, telling me I was a nuisance for trying to keep a roof over her head. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't point out the hypocrisy or demand gratitude. When you reach a certain age, you learn that arguing with entitlement is like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. I understand. I nodded slowly. You want to handle your own business? I won't interfere anymore. Thank you, Sarah muttered, already turning back toward the music and her guests. David closed the door, the click of the lock sounding incredibly loud in the quiet hallway. I walked back to my car. My hands weren't shaking. My vision wasn't blurred with tears. Instead, my mind was remarkably clear. They wanted their own lives. They wanted to be entirely independent. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. The drive home felt much shorter. When I walked into my house, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I brewed a cup of black tea, took it to my home office, and turned on my desk lamp. I pulled out the thick leather binder where I kept all the family financials. Arthur had always been meticulous about record keeping, and I had maintained the habit. I flipped to the section labeled Sarah and David. I stared at the numbers. The initial deposit on the townhouse. The emergency credit card in my name that Sarah carried in her wallet, ostensibly for groceries and gas, which regularly showed charges for high-end dining. The family cell phone plan I still paid for. For years, I had convinced myself that this was simply what a good mother did. You provide. You cushion the fall. But looking at the ledger now, I realized I hadn't been cushioning their fall. I had been preventing them from learning how to walk. They viewed my money as their right, and my presence as a burden. I closed the binder. There was no anger left in me, only a deep, settling resolve. I was not going to be an ATM that they could kick when it dispensed the wrong denomination. I opened my laptop and logged into the property management portal. The lease renewal document was sitting in my inbox, flashing a bright red action required tag. It required my digital signature to guarantee the next 12 months of their residence. I didn't sign it. Instead, I drafted a short, polite email to the leasing office. I informed them that my financial circumstances had shifted, and I would not be renewing my status as a guarantor for the upcoming lease term. I hit send. Then I logged into my bank account. I located the authorized user card with Sarah's name on it. 2 clicks later, the card was permanently deactivated. I felt a strange sense of lightness settle over my shoulders. The heavy lifting was over. The next morning, I woke up at 6, just as the sun began to peek through the oak trees in my backyard. I enjoyed my coffee on the patio, listening to the birds, feeling more rested than I had in months. At exactly 9 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called my estate planner, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer named Mr. Harrison, who had handled Arthur's will. Odessa, wonderful to hear from you. His voice crackled through the receiver. How can I help you today? Do we need to update the trust? Yes, we do, I replied smoothly. I want to restructure my assets. Currently, the primary residence and the bulk of the liquid accounts are set to transfer directly to Sarah upon my passing. I want to change that. I heard the scratch of a pen on his end. All right. What are the new directives? I want the estate liquidated. 50% goes to the local children's hospital in Arthur's name. The other 50% goes into an irrevocable trust for my future grandchildren should Sarah have any accessible only for education and only after they turn 18. Sarah is to receive nothing directly. Mr. Harrison paused. That is a significant alteration, Odessa. Are you absolutely certain? I've never been more certain, I assured him. She has requested independence. I am honoring that request permanently. I'll have the documents drafted by Tuesday. You can come by the office to sign. I hung up the phone. There were no dramatic courtroom battles, no police sirens, no screaming matches. Just quiet, administrative boundaries being firmly drawn in ink. I spent the rest of the afternoon tending to my garden, pulling weeds that had been allowed to overgrow. By evening, I went to bed early, knowing the weekend was going to bring a storm. The storm arrived on Monday morning. I was in the middle of a crossword puzzle when my phone lit up. It was Sarah. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen to accept the call. Mom? Her voice was frantic, pitched 2 octaves higher than usual. Did you forget to sign the lease? The leasing office just emailed us. They said the guarantor was removed and our rent is jumping to the month-to-month premium. It's almost $4,000. I took a slow sip of my tea. I didn't forget Sarah. I informed them I would not be guaranteeing the lease moving forward. Silence stretched across the line, heavy and thick. What? Why would you do that? She demanded, panic bleeding into anger. You know we don't make enough to qualify for this place on our own. They're going to give us a notice to vacate if we can't secure a new guarantor by Friday. I know, I answered calmly. Then fix it. Call them right now and tell them it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Sarah, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. You told me very clearly on Thursday night to stop calling. You said you have your own lives and you want to handle your own business. I listened to you. I am stepping out of your business. You're doing this because of a party. David's voice suddenly boomed through the speakerphone. He was furious. You're jeopardizing our housing because your feelings got hurt over an anniversary dinner. I'm not doing anything, David, I corrected him. I simply stopped doing everything. If you are adults with your own lives, you should be able to qualify for your own apartment. Good luck. I ended the call. My heart beat a little faster, but my hands remained steady. I blocked their numbers for the next 24 hours. They needed time to sit in the reality they had demanded. By Wednesday, my phone showed a dozen missed calls and a string of increasingly aggressive text messages from David. The veneer of the polite, successful son-in-law had completely peeled away. You can't do this to us, one text read. We're your family. Sarah is crying. Read another. If we get evicted, this is on you. I didn't reply. They weren't looking for a mother. They were looking for a manager to fix the mess they had made. On Thursday afternoon, I unblocked Sarah's number and called her back. She answered on the first ring. Mom, please. She sounded exhausted. David is stressing out. The leasing office won't budge. We tried to use the emergency credit card to pay the premium to buy us some time, and the card declined. What is going on? I closed the account, I stated simply. You cut off my card, she gasped, genuinely shocked. Mom, how are we supposed to buy groceries? How are we supposed to live? I leaned back in my chair, looking at a framed photo of Arthur on my desk. He had worked grueling hours in a warehouse to ensure we had a roof over our heads. He never expected a handout. Sarah, you are 30 years old. Your husband is 32. Millions of people buy their own groceries and pay their own rent every single day. You will figure it out just like your father and I did. This is completely toxic. Sarah snapped her sorrow, vanishing into pure spite. You're trying to control us with money. You want us to come crawling back and beg. No, I replied softly. I want you to be independent. I have removed the money so I can never control you again. You are entirely free. We're coming over, she demanded. We're not doing this over the phone. You're going to sit down and talk to us, and you're going to fix this. I am not receiving guests today, I said and hung up. I lived in a quiet neighborhood that wasn't overly luxurious, but it was safe, well-maintained, and had a strict homeowners association. We had a security checkpoint at the front entrance that logged every visitor. Knowing Sarah's temperament and having seen David's aggressive texts, I didn't want them bringing their chaos to my front door. I picked up my landline and called the community security booth. Frank. I greeted the guard on duty. It's Odessa from number 42. Afternoon, Ms. Odessa. How can I help you? I'm expecting 2 individuals who might try to access the neighborhood today. Sarah and David. They are not authorized visitors. Please do not let them through the gate. Understood, Frank replied professionally. I'll make a note in the system. If they cause a fuss, we'll ask them to leave. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, the security booth called. Ms. Odessa. Frank's voice was tight. Your daughter and son-in-law are here at the gate. They're insisting they have a right to enter because they are family. The gentleman is getting quite loud. They do not have permission, I confirmed. Please handle it according to protocol. I stood by my living room window sipping water. Part of me, the mother who used to bandage scraped knees, felt a twinge of sadness. But the woman who had stood on that porch in Buckhead, dismissed and humiliated, held firm. They thought they could bully their way back into the bank vault. They were about to learn that the vault was permanently sealed. Later that evening, Frank left a detailed voicemail explaining what had happened. When he denied them entry, David had lost his temper. He stepped out of his car and began yelling at the security booth, claiming he had a legal right to visit his mother-in-law. Sarah had stood by arms crossed, demanding Frank lift the barrier immediately, shouting that her mother was just being dramatic. Frank had stayed calm. He informed them they were trespassing on private community property without resident authorization. When David refused to get back in his car and blockaded the visitor lane, Frank radioed for the neighborhood patrol vehicle. 2 community security guards arrived in a golf cart with flashing yellow lights. It wasn't the police, but it was enough of a uniformed presence to shatter David's bravado. They stood on either side of his car and politely but firmly instructed him to leave the premises or face local law enforcement for trespassing. Embarrassed and realizing they had no leverage, David got back into the car. Sarah yelled one final insult out the window at Frank before they reversed out of the entrance and sped away down the main road. I listened to the voicemail twice, then deleted it. They had come to claim my house, my time, and my compliance. They were met with a closed gate and a polite refusal. I didn't need to argue with them. I didn't need to explain myself again. The boundaries I had set were invisible, but they were made of steel. 6 months passed. The frantic phone calls eventually stopped. The angry text messages faded into silence. Through the grapevine of extended family, I heard that Sarah and David were unable to secure a new guarantor. They received a notice to vacate and had to move out of the luxury townhouse in Buckhead. They downgraded to a small 2-bedroom apartment in a much less trendy suburb. David had to take a full-time salaried job to make ends meet, and Sarah had to start budgeting her own grocery trips. They were furious with me, painting me as the villain to anyone who would listen. They claimed I abandoned them, but I knew the truth. I hadn't abandoned them. I had introduced them to the real world. Mr. Harrison finalized the new trust. My estate was secured entirely detached from their influence. My house remained quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt entirely mine. Sometimes I sit on my patio in the evenings watching the fireflies dance over the lawn. I think about that Thursday night on their porch, the smell of barbecue and the sound of music I wasn't allowed to enjoy. It used to sting, but now it just feels like a necessary turning point. I stopped being the problem they needed to manage, and they stopped being the burden I had to carry. I don't know if we will ever speak again. If we do, it will be on equal footing as adults. Until then, my doors are locked, my bills are paid, and my life is entirely my own. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that sometimes cushioning every fall for the people we love accidentally prevents them from learning how to stand. We often confuse financial support with love, and in doing so, we trap ourselves in a cycle of being needed rather than being respected. Drawing a boundary isn't an act of revenge. It is an act of self-preservation. True independence cannot be gifted, it has to be earned. By stepping back and letting them face the real world, I didn't just give them the reality check they asked for. I finally gave myself permission to live in peace. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love? It's never an easy decision, but sometimes it's the only way forward. Let me know your thoughts and share your own experiences in the comments down below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real, unfiltered stories about life, family, and finding your own peace. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.